Okay, so I think the numbers joining the webinar is now sort of stabilized. I know a number of other people will come along during the course of the event. So let me begin by introducing myself. I'm Alan Barrett. I'm the director of the ESRI, and it's a great pleasure to welcome everybody this morning to this joint webinar, which is being organised by ourselves, the ESRI, and the Department of Rural and Community Development. And the primary focus of the webinar today is to launch a new ESRI report that has been commissioned by our colleagues in the department. The title of the report is Review of International Approaches to Evaluating Rural and Community Development Investment and Supports. And this report is part of a joint research program between the department and the ESRI, all about evaluating the sorts of supports that the department is involved in providing. So we've a pretty packed schedule over the next hour and a little bit. So we have speakers beginning from the ESRI who will go through the report. Then some of our colleagues in the department will be giving responses, and then Adeline O'Brien of Empower will talk later on in the event as well. And hopefully we'll have time for questions and answers. Might be tough, but we'll do our best. And then towards the end of the event, the Secretary General of the department, Kevin McCarthy, will say a few words as well. Now, one of the first things we were asked in a recent webinar was, what is is there a hashtag for the event? So I know there's a lot of people on the call, and a lot of you may want to get involved in Twitter discussions. So I thought I'd just make up a hashtag, if that's okay. So I thought we'd just use the initials of the department and the ESRI. So if you want to tweet about the event, can you just use hashtag D/CD ESRI? Okay, so again, the initials of the department and the institute. So hashtag D/CD ESRI, and hopefully we can get a conversation going later on in the morning. If we do have time for the Q&A, you can submit questions through the questions and answer function. And probably a good idea, actually, if people just put their questions there anyway. And even if we don't get around to answering them here, we can pass them on to the participants. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand over now as quickly as I can, and I'm going to call on my colleague Adele Whelan, and Adele is going to take us through the details of the report. You have a lot to get through, Adele, in the next 15 minutes, but again, I'm going to ask you to do your best to stay to that timeline. So over to you, Adele.
Sure, I do. Thank you, Alan. I'll just begin by sharing my slides here. Okay, so good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to see that we have so many people joining us for this webinar today. And I'm making a presentation to briefly summarize the findings of our report on evaluating rural and community development, investment and supports. I'm making this presentation on behalf of myself, Adele Whelan, and my colleagues and co-authors, Seamus McGuinness and Alan Barrett, with thanks also to the DRCD for funding this research. In terms of an introduction then, the department, DRCD, was established in July 2017. The most recent statement of strategy for the department commits to building capacity to evaluate ongoing work in order to inform future policies and programs. So all DRCD expenditure is targeted at rural and community development in order to support vibrant, inclusive and sustainable communities throughout Ireland. That's a quotation from their strategy. So the pandemic has certainly highlighted the centrality of community, both rural and urban settings, for the well-being of individuals over a vast range of age cohorts. The expenditure in 2019 for the department in terms of gross expenditure was 290 million within that year. So that illustrates the amount of expenditure and activities also within this space. We established a research program between ourselves and the DRCD in late 2019, and this is the first report, first output from this program. It's important to highlight initially the importance of evaluation to ensure good policy making and to maximize policy impact of programs. Evaluation and monitoring, they're key tools in order to ensure public monies are being effectively spent and looking at government-funded programs and initiatives and seeing if they are achieving their stated goals and objectives. So overall evaluation is really a dynamic process. When we have a policy evaluation, there are really broadly three possible outcomes, okay? The first is the program can be found to be meeting its objectives. It can be found to be partly meeting its objectives, or worst case scenario, not at all. So the role of evaluation is really to identify good practice, then identify shortfallings and make recommendations for improvements overall. So there's two real main goals. One is in terms of accountability, but the other is in terms of learning. Overall, this department undertakes a very diverse range of activities. We identified 20 specific programs of expenditure, which accounted for roughly 80% of total expenditure across the department. And we categorized 6 key areas of common activity. These areas were community development, rural development, capital infrastructure, enterprise supports, employment supports, and the provision and development of amenities. And I'll speak about each of these briefly and the findings across all of them. The aim of this study was to firstly identify international best practice in evaluating and monitoring the expenditures across all of these areas. And then secondly, to assess the degree to which the evaluations in Ireland have been adhering to these international best practice standards. But the main goal at all points was to further develop the DRCD's monitoring and evaluation infrastructure. The steps that we took, as I've said, is we started with the DRCD suite of programs and supports, and we categorized the key areas. Then we targeted our international review in the areas of rural and community development for these key areas. We looked at international approaches in measurement and evaluations of the programs of interest. Then we looked at current approaches utilized in Ireland, and we benchmarked those back against the international best practice. So there's a lot more detail in the report, but I will talk through each of the 6 now briefly. The literature overall, to say first, is it highlights extensive difficulties in evaluating policies in the area of rural and community development. That is the first thing to say. So communities, they benefit from many different supports at any one time. And that makes it very difficult to untangle the specific outcomes that we might be interested in of a particular intervention. It makes it very, very difficult. And also, we might be interested in a multiplicity of outcomes. So looking at lots of changes across many different variables associated with the policies. So to begin with community development, which is in fact one of the most difficult. So measuring key areas of DRCD activity in the area of community development is highly complex, especially if we consider counterfactual evaluation. So looking at counterfactual evaluation of community level outcomes, what we really want to compare here is the outcome for individuals or businesses or our local area. And what would they have experienced if they did not have the intervention, and then compare that to the outcomes with the intervention and see what the difference is. And this is particularly complex, virtually impossible. There's many, many papers in terms of literature review looking at the conceptual, theoretical frameworks of how this is to be done, but virtually no examples of counterfactual evaluations in practice. So we do recommend that other forms of effective monitoring are possible, and they're recommended using such conceptual frameworks as the logic model. There are other models, ABCD model, theory of change model. There are many different ones. I've taken the logic model as an example here. So this can be used in connection with quantitative and other qualitative tools where possible. So the logic model here that I've shown, it shows the logical relationship that we'd expect between the resources that are invested, the activities that take place, and then the benefits and changes that result as a result of the investment and the activities, okay? But all of the conceptual theories, they link the program objectives, starting with the program objectives, and how these relate to inputs, processes, and outputs. When we examine the current approaches to evaluation of community development in Ireland, we found overall that they're in line with international best practice. And the main reason is that there exists a rich quantitative and qualitative data framework relative to international standards that enable effective monitoring and impact measurement. One example is the CICAP program, which looks at social inclusion and well-being within communities. And the tools, the range of tools that are used there are the logic model framework, also distance measured tools that look at hard outcomes and soft outcomes, and thematic qualitative reports. These are reports on themes that are of interest to the department at any particular time. So in order to capture the benefits that result from program activities, it's really important to use qualitative and more soft measurements of soft outcomes that would otherwise be missed if only hard outcomes are recorded. So for rural development, as is the case of community development, it really can be difficult to isolate the impacts had by any interventions. Rural development is focused on improving the welfare of communities, rural communities in particular, and it encompasses aspects such as improved utilization of amenities and also the development of the rural economy as a whole. Internationally, the majority of studies really relate to farm investment supports. So for example, the paper by McCalloch et al. Here looks at food processing sector in Poland, with only a small number of studies really relating to the impacts of regional well-being or the quality of life in rural areas. However, the international literature, when compared to community development, it really shows that empirical methodologies have been more readily applied in this area. And one other key aspect was the Rural Development Index. So this is a composite index that encompasses a range of relevant variables related to area level rural development and well-being. So it includes variables and indicators around social, economic, environmental, infrastructure, and administrative indicators all combined together. When we looked for publicly available evaluations of rural development programs, they really were limited in Ireland, as we found, but the data infrastructure and the modelling tools really appeared promising. There's three key things to say in terms of developments within Ireland most recently. One is the bioeconomy input-output model that has been used for counterfactual impacts of large-scale rural investment programs, such as the RDP. And then the data infrastructure also, which has been developed for large European projects, such as the LEADER program. These are likely to be important data sources going forward. Then the Central Statistics Office also has developed a new 6-way urban-rural area categorization that was developed in late 2019. And this could potentially be used to facilitate analysis looking at more distinct geographical areas. So in a vast contrast, really, capital infrastructure projects, the evaluation methods here are really long-standing and very well developed. The main approach used is cost-benefit analysis. And while it's used for the evaluation of large-scale capital projects, they're and regularly used for that, there really is methodological challenges with cost-benefit analysis that cannot be escaped, mainly related to the specification of a number of really key parameters. So estimating expected costs, benefits, and discount rates. So these are really challenges associated with the methodology here. Also, systematic optimism bias plays a key role in forecasting anything around capital infrastructure projects. And the international literature really finds that large-scale projects often do not go as planned and often overrun as well. So in Ireland, we have the example of the National Children's Hospital. So weaknesses have certainly been identified here in Ireland in terms of both the appraisal, implementation, and governance approaches applied to such large-scale capital projects. But this is not unusual internationally. Enterprise supports. Next, when we talk about enterprise supports in the context of rural and community development, well, this typically relates, of course, to assistance to small, medium enterprises. And what we want to do in terms of determining a counterfactual is to compare two similar firms, one who did not receive the support group as a control group, and then a group who did receive the supports. The outcomes that we're interested in quite often are firm level performance indicators, such as the employment growth, employment sustainability, firm turnover, and profitability. But we can also look at another form. The evaluations can focus on measuring differential impacts of different forms of grant assistance on the performance of assisted firms. So for example, we might look at how the relative impact if we compare marketing versus capital, research and development, and employment grants on assisted firm performance. When we looked to examine the counterfactual evaluations in Ireland relative to other countries, there really was a lack of counterfactual evaluation in the area of enterprise supports overall. And it is somewhat surprising given the importance of enterprise in the context of the overall Irish economic policy framework. But it may be due in part potentially to the lack of administrative and servitive data that is necessary to facilitate such analysis. In terms of employment supports, this is, as with enterprise supports, it's very well developed at an international level. The evaluation of employment supports again involves comparing the employment rate with job seekers who have received the supports and a comparison control group who did not receive the supports, and looking at the differences. However, one thing to say, which is important, I think, in the context of rural and community development, is that often employment supports offered in this sphere, they target those furthest from the labour market. And just comparing employment rates alone may not be ideal. So often mixed methods approaches are really necessary. So using a mix of qualitative and quantitative approaches to examine the impacts more fully. And an example of this is a recent evaluation that the ESRI conducted on pre-employment supports within the SICAP programme. And that included a counterfactual evaluation and then qualitative, a range of qualitative analysis to really explain the findings there. There are many studies published in Ireland overall using international approaches, and they appear to really meet international best practice standards around employment supports. And finally then, amenities. So the evaluation of amenity projects, it really varies considerably. It's more like the community rural development space here. It depends on the goals of the project, the data available, and also the budget available for evaluation here. Amenities projects include a vast range of types of projects. It could be the development of local parks, woodlands, libraries, leisure facilities. But it will generally involve some primary data collection, often in the form of surveys. There's two main approaches that we discuss in the report and give examples of. One is where you ask respondents, what is their willingness to pay to use an amenity, and describing what that amenity might be. And you check what their willingness to pay for that is. Then the second is a travel cost method. So that's a person's time and expenditure in order that they show they are willing to incur these charges in order to enjoy an amenity. Okay. So in Ireland, there's a limited amount of literature evaluating the impact of amenities, but what we have found appears consistent with international best practice, and it uses these methods that I've described here. One example is the impact on the greenways in Ireland was evaluated using the travel cost method. So in conclusion then, very briefly, the evaluation of programs internationally in key areas is really heterogeneous, okay? Some areas are well developed and relatively straightforward. So they are the capital infrastructure projects, employment supports, and to a lesser degree, amenities. But other areas are really highly complex. So measuring the benefits and outcomes of community and rural development programs are really fall into that category. When we looked in Ireland, the evaluations that really met international best practices were in the areas of employment supports, capital infrastructure projects, and amenities. But there was a lack of counterfactual approaches relative to international studies in the area of employment supports. And where studies exist in rural and community development, we really found that the modelling capabilities and the data are promising in terms of future evaluation. So lastly then, there is really, even though I have presented the 6 areas and the evaluation methods used internationally, that is not to say that there is no set toolkit here for specific programs. The methodology that needs to be adopted has to be customized for each program. So it's customized to the objectives of the program and also the needs of the beneficiaries. In some cases, and it may be adequate for an evaluation to be purely empirical or purely qualitative, but in many cases, it's going to involve a combination of counterfactual evaluation, monitoring techniques, and qualitative assessments to really tell the full story. Monitoring and evaluation within the DRCD interventions really can be improved by using mixed methods approaches, and there are many mixed methods approaches already happening in that space, but also to improve the consistency and the quality of the data collected. Again, to finally say, the role of evaluation really is crucial to ensure good policy making, to maximize policy impact of programs. Whether you come from the accountability side or the learning side, there really is benefits here to evaluation. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, and just to say the next steps within this research program will be to identify appropriate key indicators for the monitoring and rural and community development. And I'll leave our contact details here for anybody who wishes to contact us. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Adele. Huge amount of material there in a relatively short space of time. So congratulations on that, and indeed for the report itself. So we're going to move on to the next presentation. I'm delighted to welcome Geraldine Crean from the Leader Unit in the department. And again, Geraldine is going to give a quick view and monitoring evaluation from the perspective of the Leader program. So I'll hand it. Before I just hand over, we did get a question about the recording of the event. So yeah, the event is being recorded all right, and it'll be posted on websites later. But just to be clear, the only people that are seen are the people who are on your screens. So that I hope that clarifies that. So anyway, Geraldine, can I hand over to you now?
Sure, thanks, Alan. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Geraldine Crean, and I work in the Leader section of the department. And the purpose of my presentation this morning is just to outline the Leader approach to rural development and the approach used for monitoring and evaluation for the Leader programme. The presentation will also highlight the range of data gathered by Leader stakeholders for not just evaluation purposes, but also for reporting requirements. So it's relevant to highlight that Leader is a rural development component of the EU's Common Agricultural Policy, which means it is a continually evolving rural development policy, with each iteration of the programme running for 7 years. For the 2014-2020 programme, Leader was one of the EU measures that was designed to target EU Priority 6, which was to promote social inclusion, poverty reduction, and economic development in rural areas. The programme had a total allocation of €250 million, with 62.8% of this co-funded by the EU. And for the next iteration of the programme, the policy will be designed to promote very similar themes, so employment, growth, gender equality, and local development in rural areas, as well as social inclusion and an element of bioeconomy. There is also going to be a cross-cutting requirement for all measures, including Leader, to aid in climate change mitigation. And the new programme will also see the introduction of what is termed a new delivery model, which will be more performance-based and less compliance-focused, meaning there will be a greater requirement to demonstrate the positive effects of Leader and the added value of the Leader approach. So monitoring and evaluation, while already a compulsory component, will therefore be a key element for the next iteration of the Leader programme. And while it is a compulsory component, the time spent by Leader stakeholders evaluating and reflecting on a local action group's contribution to the communities in its area is invaluable for a range of reasons, and just to name some of these. Given that each iteration of Leader runs for 7 years, Monitoring and evaluation enables leader local action groups to continually monitor their progress towards achieving the original aims and objectives they set out for their areas. Continuous evaluation and self-assessment will also improve the local action group's activities and processes. And then ongoing evaluation helps leader stakeholders demonstrate that added value of the community-led local development approach associated with leaders' rural development style. As a community-led local development initiative, LEADER is an integrated development process. It's designed to engage, enable, resource, and empower rural communities in undertaking their own development. So there are three common and interlinked elements fundamental to LEADER's community-led local development approach: the area, the partnership, and the local development strategy. And each of these underpin LEADER monitoring and evaluation. Under the area-based approach, LEADER funding targets the priorities of the area, not specific projects or groups of projects, thus making it distinct from a project-based approach. So for LEADER 2014-2020 purposes, for example, there were 28 sub-regional areas, and these corresponded for the most part with county council administrative regions. Then local partnerships for area development work through a structured governance mechanism. In LEADER, this is referred to as the local action group. Involvement in the LEADER local action group means that the people who were previously the passive beneficiaries of a policy become active partners and drivers of their area's development. And to achieve this, the LEADER local action group is responsible for ensuring that the interests of all communities within their sub-regional area are represented, this being the defining characteristic of community-led local development. And then finally, the community-led local development approach is carried out within each area via an integrated local development strategy. The groups, via their local development strategies, aim to explore and address the needs and opportunities of the area in an integrated way to achieve the desired common goals. So integrated here does not mean all-encompassing. LAGs must make choices and focus funding on the objectives and actions that add value to support which already exists and have the greatest chances of contributing to the longer-term changes they want to achieve for their area. So the ultimate aim here is to facilitate the development of robust strategies that address the needs of the sub-regional area and that are complementary to other development processes at local, sub-regional and national level. The development of robust strategies being the first step in evaluation for LEADER. Following this, evaluation is ongoing. It requires the continuous assessment of the strategy and the work of the LEADER local action groups. So in the first instance, the local action group wants to ensure they are on track to achieving the objectives they set out in their strategy document. Bringing us to the second component for LEADER monitoring and evaluation, which is the LEADER IT system. It encompasses a significant monitoring database, and LEADER stakeholders gather monitoring data throughout the programming period, with this data forming the foundation for the group's evaluation activity and ongoing assessment of the work undertaken in their sub-regional area. When evaluating CLLD, it is also important for the local action group to focus on identifying where they are bringing the added value to the local communities. And in this regard, consultation with relevant stakeholders is very important for understanding what is working and what needs to be improved upon. So together with the monitoring data, additional data collection is required. And in this regard, LEADER local action groups undertake case studies throughout the programme period, which help to demonstrate the positive impact that the LEADER programme has on the communities and businesses in rural Ireland. The National Rural Network is a key LEADER stakeholder in this regard, where one of their roles is to improve the quality of rural development and inform the broader public of the benefits of LEADER, accomplishing this with the support of the LEADER local action groups and implementing partners through the use of both storyboards and case studies. The 2014-2020 LEADER programme supported projects across a range of diverse themes, such as enterprise development, rural tourism and enhancement of rural towns, with the project theme and sub-theme being an example of just some of the data captured via the LEADER's monitoring database. The IT system also captures the strategy objective which the project will be contributing to. So this enables LEADER stakeholders via the IT system reports feature to ensure they are on track to achieving the objectives for the area as set out in their strategy document. This slide details some of the end of project indicators that is collected by leader stakeholder groups throughout the programme period. I won't go through the full slide, but for example, where it was specified that a project will result in job creation, on completion of the project, the actual jobs created figure is collected. In this summary slide, I just want to synopsize the key points for leader monitoring and evaluation. So in the leader context, evaluation begins with the development of a robust strategy by local action groups for their sub-regional areas. It is then an ongoing process where leader groups monitor their progress to ensure they are in line to achieve their objectives for their area, implementing measures and taking action if this is not the case, for example, specific animation activity. Additional data collection through consultation with relevant stakeholders, the example of leader case studies and storyboards were highlighted during the presentation, is important in order to help identify where the local action group is adding value for communities within their sub-regional area. And then finally, I mentioned the added value of leader throughout the presentation, and this added value can come from 3 different areas. The first is improved social and human capital. So for example, this might be the establishment of new community groups where none existed previously, or new members to dwindling community groups. The second is improved local governance. This might be increased community and other stakeholder involvement in the development process. And then the third area where the added value of leader can be seen is via enhanced project results. So these being achieved as a result of the increased leverage brought about by, for example, the establishment of new community groups and increased stakeholder involvement in the development process, which in turn leads to not just more sustainable and innovative projects, but also new project promoters at a local level. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. So thank you for listening, and I'll pass back to, I think, Alan. I've left my contact details as well on the slide. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to email me. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Geraldine. That was a really interesting run through, and I see one of the comments already is basically picking up on the CLLD theme, and anyway, congratulating you on all of that. Okay, we got to keep moving quickly, as I was suggesting, and obviously Geraldine sort of gave the presentation more from the rural perspective, so we want to move on to the more community perspective, and I'm delighted to say that Sinead Quinn from the Social Inclusion and Communities Unit within the department is going to give a presentation now as well. So over to you, Sinead.
Thank you, Alan. I hope you can all hear me there. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sinead Quinn, and my main area of responsibility is the policy, programme design and operation of the CICAP programme. I'm going to speak today about the monitoring and evaluation framework developed for CICAP, what works well, the challenges and the ways developed to alleviate those challenges. Today's ESRI report highlights the challenges associated with measuring the causal impact of community development programmes, and that applies particularly to CICAP as a community development programme. CICAP uses community development approaches to engage and support vulnerable people across 13 target groups who may be experiencing social exclusion and inequality. It also supports those local community groups who represent and advocate for them to build their capacity. We recognise the importance of evidence in programme design and implementation, and we have made significant investment in monitoring, evaluation and learning for CICAP. The programme has a comprehensive monitoring framework outlining how programme outcomes are assessed. This is accompanied by an ICT system called IRIS, the Integrated Reporting Information System, which allows us to track live progress against indicators. So I have set out a selection of data here relating to the provisional results for 2020. It's just across a few slides. I won't go through everything in detail, but just to say that this data includes the number of individuals and local community groups supported, the number of social enterprises registered to the programme. It tracks the achievement of annual KPIs against targets set. It provides a breakdown of the level of supports provided to the various target groups and shows the actions and outputs under a number of categories, such as lifelong learning. It's worth noting the availability of comprehensive data was key to accessing EU funds for SciCap under the ESF PEL programme, the Programme for Employability, Inclusion and Learning. And IRIS has been held up by the ESF Managing Authority as an exemplar and led to SciCap being allocated an additional 33% of funding, coming to a total of 40 million allocation from PEL. In addition, we have invested significantly in a series of research and evaluations for the programme. We engaged the ESRI and their evaluations included evaluation of pre-employment supports mentioned by Adele there and value in community development. Quality Matters produced a report on the good practices in SciCap, working with NEETs, young people not in employment, education or training. And Pobble produced the first SciCap research learning brief recently, looking at the role of SciCap in supporting new communities. Some key programme strengths and added value that has been identified in the evaluation of pre-employment supports and the research in supporting new communities has been the importance of the community development and outreach approach taken with hardest to reach in communities. The research also highlights the impact of the developmental and one-to-one supports delivered to those furthest from the labour market or who need more intensive supports, a key feature of the SciCap programme. So what is working well with the monitoring framework? The programme utilises a mixed method approach of both qualitative and quantitative data to assess what's working well and to identify areas for improvement. It provides a wealth of data about individuals and community groups. It tracks information at beneficiary level, which helps to understand programme performance and factors that influence it over time. It recognises the importance of measuring soft outcomes through the introduction of a distance travel tool for SciCap, which I will speak about later. And it recognises the importance of measuring impact through the investment in research as outlined. There are challenges. The current assessment of the community development element of the programme is not effective. Further work is needed in defining the role of SciCap in community development and how its effectiveness can be measured. However, the investment in case studies development has alleviated this challenge to some extent, and again, I will speak about that shortly. The ability of the distance travel tool to consistently measure soft outcomes and various dimensions of social inclusion needs some further consideration. The engagement of beneficiaries is very limited, so the information provided on the effectiveness of the programme comes primarily from programme implementers. And finally, while the wealth of the data collated by the programme is a strength, it also creates a lot of admin burden on local development companies who implement the programme. So we have lots of hard data and research, which is very valuable and essential as part of the monitoring framework. But in essence, SciCap is about people, and to see the impact for an individual, we need to also look behind the numbers and the data. We need to look at the personal stories and see the difference that SciCap supports are making to people's life chances and future opportunities. The ESRI research references the use of distance travel tools as one way to evaluate impact. We have successfully developed a distance travel tool for SciCap called My Journey, which is co-designed between the department, Pobble, LCDCs, and LDC staff, and it is statistically validated by Trinity College, meeting international standards. My Journey is a simple questionnaire made up of 27 questions, which measures an individual's soft skills in 5 competency areas set out in the next slide, such as literacy and numeracy competence, communication skills, general work and education readiness skills. The tool doesn't measure and evaluate the programme itself. Rather, it is a tool that allows us to observe the change in an individual's personal journey towards reaching their goals. A limitation of the tool, as with all such tools, is that we cannot attribute the change in that journey solely to the SciCap support provided. as other services the individual is in receipt of may play a role too. However, it does serve as a useful tool to support frontline staff and beneficiaries of the programme. Feedback from frontline staff is that it has enabled them to tailor the supports offered under the programme to ensure they meet the individual's needs. So over time, consistent use of My Journey will enable a structured and strategic tailoring of supports. And importantly, it will feed into considerations at national level in terms of programme design and policy priorities. So it really has the potential to positively influence the impact of the programme for the users of the service. Another area of particular focus has been to develop and raise the quality of case study examples for CICAP, which are proving to be a very effective way to demonstrate the impact of the programme. We convened a working group with local development companies and LCDCs, the department and PUBL, to work collaboratively to improve the quality of case studies. And one of the aims of the working group was to promote the use of alternative media to showcase the case studies, such as videos and use of social media, and also to explore ways we can better share the message of what CICAP is doing on the ground within communities. We have many great examples of case studies, and I've selected two here to mention briefly. Firstly, Ballyhora Development Company. This is an audio case study on the East Limerick Traveller Project, which won a STAR Award, which is an awards initiative coordinated by Aintus. A feature of note is that it includes a showcase of one traveller woman's journey and the progression she has made to being recruited as a community traveller link worker. So it really shows the impact CICAP Supports has had for this lady in her journey. The second example is County Cavan Local Development. This is a case study on the response to the needs of communities during the COVID-19 crisis through a range of supports addressing food poverty. This case study won the Special Award category at the Pride of Place Awards in 2020. It was also selected as an example of excellence in customer service under the deeper Department of Public Expenditure Reform, Our Public Service Awards 2020. You'll note I've detailed on the slide the collaborative partners engaged in both projects. This highlights the key strength of CICAP to collaborate with a range of stakeholders and to act as an enabler to leverage funding across other programmes. It demonstrates how CICAP contributes to the achievement of social inclusion objectives across a range of government programmes, and can complement and strengthen the impact that can be achieved for people in our communities. We thought it might be of interest today to hear in more detail about a specific project and its impact. So we've invited Adeline O'Brien, CEO of Empower in Fingal, to tell us about work they're doing with the Roma community in that area. I want to thank Adeline for participating today, and I will hand over to her now.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sinead. Thanks for that. And we're delighted to be here to talk about the work of Empower and the rollout of the CICAP programme in Fingal. So I'm just going to share my screen there. So we've a lot of content to get through in a short amount of time. So a lot of the content in the slides, it's for distribution later. So I'm happy to forward my contact details if anybody wants to go through elements of it in more detail after the presentation. So as Sinead said, we're the local development company for Fingal. And just to put our engagement with the Roma community in context, in about 2017 and pre-2017, we had a little or no engagement really with the Roma community. So we looked to a study that was produced in 2016 in Balbriggan by Musicantia and Carja, where 70 families were studied. And, you know, the research findings are not surprising, and the barriers that were identified for Roma people are clearly there. We also looked to the Roma in Ireland 2018 study that identified about 3,500 Roma people living in Fingal. We commenced our work in 2017 with Musicantia, a Roma music school in Balbriggan. We assigned community development workers, and in the first instance, it was very light touch capacity building, grant writing supports for the group, but we had little or no transition really into lifelong learning supports at that stage. So we decided to take a look at what we were doing in terms of engagement, and we reflected and took a very conscious but strategic decision to really work in terms of explicit but not exclusive targeting for very hard to reach populations for the SICAP programme in Fingal, and most specifically for the Roma community. So we went through a process of gentle but very extensive discussion, and it's highlighted there the 4 primary and consistent barriers that emerged for Roma people engaging with all services. Following that, in 2018, we developed a pilot programme. This emerged from the non-judgmental and trust-building conversations that we had over a period of time, and we acknowledged that the telling of your story is a very precious commodity. So we held at that with great privilege. The pilot in 2018 we had 27 people attending the pilot. There was no need to register at all or disclose any personal information in attending the clinic. We hired a temporary Roma advocate, and we ensured that lived experience and Romani fluency were key competency for the roles for the temporary Roma advocate. And we had people attending the clinic learning about our supports and raising awareness about their own rights and entitlements, but in their own language. So following the success of that pilot programme, we very quickly had 55, mainly men from the Roma community, approach us looking for industry-specific training, and that was completed over a 4-month period. Around this time, we were looking at the diversity of Fingal anyway, and it's widely known Fingal is the most diverse and youngest county in Ireland. And we were trying to develop broad strategies about how to support our community leaders, particularly in the Roma community, travelling community and new community. So we were developing a programme with TU Dublin, Blanchardstown campus, intercultural community development and leadership. And we were in the process of translating our IRIS forms into about 7 languages. And our SICAP manager, Felix, joined the board of Musicantia just to provide long-term commitment and support in terms of the governance of the group. So that was the broad context of what we were doing in terms of harder to reach populations. So what does that specifically mean for our Roma engagement? Well, in the first instance, 3 members of the Roma community completed the leadership programme. And I'd just like to introduce it to George here, who was actually one of the first 55 group who approached us around industry-based training. And George worked then following that in construction and security for a number of years, but he stayed in contact with us over that time because we were a very safe place for him to come. We then notified him about this course in TU Dublin. He completed the course, and following that, he applied for a position with us as an employment specialist. He's currently working with about 100 plus Roma job seekers across the county at the minute. So we found in 2020 we were making huge progress very quickly. So we needed to reflect and take stock at what we were doing, because we just wanted to make sure that we wanted to expand the offering that we had for the entire community beyond industry-specific training and employment supports. So we engaged a facilitator with a social work background who had an ability to assess an awareness around cultural values, trauma, social circus and needs. And through a very long process, where Louise became in close contact with all of the people that we worked with in the Roma community, we developed the Empower Roma integration strategy for Fingal. So we went again to Sergio and the Musicantia family in Balbriggan, and they helped and supported us to establish an advisory group of Roma with national reach. This advisory group is a rights-based advocacy service. It's an Empower programme, and it's Manouche, which means community in Roma. And they're the key aspects to our integration strategy outlined there. So Manouche will have a variety of strands specifically for the Roma community. It's everything from early intervention, health, well-being, employment supports, research and evaluation, and it's all through the process of development, partnership and community and capacity building rather. So armed with this integration strategy, our SICAP manager, Felix, and the SICAP staff facilitated interagency work just to raise awareness across Fingal about our Roma integration strategy. And that very quickly led to leveraging additional supports. In the first instance, the Department of Justice funded a pre-employment programme for the Roma community. And one of the learnings from that was the need for very meaningful work experience. So through the LCDC and our DSP colleagues in the LCDC, we raised this issue. And LCDC and our colleagues at the DSP collaborated with us, and it led to the establishment of the first ever Roma-specific community employment scheme. So we're particularly proud of that in the North County. And then, like we all know, COVID hit, and we really had to pause and reflect because we were very much in delivery mode and we were moving at a fairly quick pace. So we had to do an immediate assessment of need. And what we found were, three critical issues that our Roma colleagues and people that we support across the county were experiencing. The first is digital poverty. So we had to very quickly work with a number of Roma families to make sure that they were included, socially included, and we considered connectivity actually as a human right. So we worked very hard to make sure that people were connected and included in the wider community digitally. We then looked at food poverty. We established a Roma food bank in Fingal. Good news spreads very quickly. That's now more of a national programme. We have sites in Louth, Meath and Monaghan. We also established a women and children's programme. It's an intergeneral health programme to really support women and children accessing primary care services, particularly with public health nurse. We've also developed a family health programme in Monaghan, and there we're engaging with 40 Roma families, and that's really in the same vein as our Fingal project, where it's about establishing a safety net clinic and improving Roma engagement with the HSE primary care team. This is a pre-COVID photograph, and it's about a piece of work that we're doing with Musicantia, and we're looking to young people and youth integration. This is an intercultural music program. It's very cool. I don't get to say things are very cool often in work, so we're really proud about this. But what's really important about this intercultural and intergenerational program is that it's entirely Roma-led. And it's really through this love and appreciation of music in the Roma community that powerful intercultural stories are being told now. So that is continuing online, but we're very hopeful that will return in the next couple of months on site. So Adele mentioned there early in our presentation about the challenges that we all have about untangling the outcomes. So I just put an overview chart in terms of numbers to show you the journey from 2017, so that you can see in 2017 we were working with around 27 individuals from the Roma community. That has grown to 2020 over 250, and this year we'll be looking at over 400 people. But you can see in the early days in 2018 and 2019, the one-to-one, the education and the employment bars you can see there are very much aligned. So that was very targeted, intense support about, the personal planning that we do with SICAP under Goal 2, about really tailoring the support so that person can land a job. We wanted to do that specifically to build credibility for the programme and build credibility around our approach, because activation measures are very important. But doing that, and the value of the work that we're doing and the success that we achieved gave us the confidence to move out of just purely the industry-based training and activation into work with women and children. The one thing that I would say in terms of the broader context is that, we've moved from 0% on our caseload to 7% of our entire caseload with the Roma community. But because our Roma colleagues and supported, re-educated us really in the art of human engagement, to the extent that now 46% of our entire caseload is either Roma, traveller or new community. So in terms of learning in SICAP specifically, what it tells us is that the flexibility of the SICAP programme to pilot the initial programme was critical, and none of the other programmes would have emerged if it wasn't for that pilot. that shows the ability for CICAP to leverage, and that really can't be underestimated because it's critical. And the other thing that we noticed really was around the recruitment and selection of staff, and to have the confidence really and the courage to value lived experience and Roma fluency as a core competency for a particular job in a particular context. That is just a diagram that demonstrates very briefly the power of the pilot CICAP program. You could see it's the central point there, and it led to leveraging all of the other 6 programs that we're currently delivering specifically for the Roma community. And then finally, what are the key learnings for us around this engagement strategy? In the first instance, we examined our expectations for the people that we serve, and we identified, back in 2017, 2018, that we needed to raise our own expectations and build a culture of raised expectations for the people that we serve as well. We looked at our own diversity in our organisation, and at that time we had 3 nationalities represented in our organisation. We now have 12 nationalities represented, so it just means that engagement with the harder to reach groups is a bit more meaningful. The main thing that we learned really is that Roma are subject matter experts in their own lives, as opposed to focus group participants or unpaid volunteers. So we valued their time as we valued our own, and we valued their experience as we value our own. But the main thing that we really want to say is that this is a continuous journey for us of raising expectations among the people we serve and our own expectations for others. But it's also about raising awareness of rights and entitlements of the Roma people that we work with as employees, colleagues, and participants on our programme. So this is the slide I normally use for questions, but I'll hand you back to the main speaker now. And again, I said all that information is available post event. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Adeline, for taking us through that. It's fascinating, and always in these events, we do try and do a blend of the sort of, the research and on one hand and the practice on the other. So it's absolutely fantastic to get your contribution. Really, really appreciated, and continued success to you. Now, just looking at our timetable, we should be handing over to Kevin McCarthy in a couple of minutes, but I would like to take a question or two. Can I just say a number of questions have come in, and I think what we will certainly do is just save the questions, provide them to all the speakers, and that maybe the speakers could interact sort of bilaterally with some of the questioners. But Adele and Seamus, if you'd come online again, there's a couple of questions that I'd like to run by you. So a number of people have asked this, but I'll take Una McCarble's sort of phrasing of the question. And the question is, what definition of community development is being used? Okay, so very, very fundamental point. And then a second one from Una. She's referring to the importance of communities being centrally involved in defining and designing evaluation frameworks. So has this been recognized as an element of good practice? So the definition of community development and this issue of involving the local communities in the process. So I don't know, Adele or Seamus, can you give a quick reaction to those?
Well, in terms of what we were considering for community development, we were very much led by the literature, and also the literature from the Department of Rural and Community Development. When we talk about community development, we're really talking about a process where the community members come together for collective action and to generate, solutions to common problems that they have. And I think what Una is saying is very, very important. The community needs to be involved in that process. So when we move to the next stage of looking at key indicators and things like that, we have in previous studies had outreach. We ran, consultations with members of local community groups, and we took information from them as part of this, as we've been building up along this work, so that they are feeding into the process. And I do think that is very important. James might want to expand.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the definition of community development will vary from country to country. They will generally have overarching common themes. But in terms of evaluation, so in Ireland, we look on policy in the area sits below generally the CICAP definition of community development, and then individual programs sit below that. So the role of evaluation is therefore then to assess the extent to which these individual programs that sit below that community development framework are meeting their goals, whether those goals are defined in terms of the individual, in terms of the firm, or in terms of the community level, and evaluation then must be designed around that. There is an issue in terms, and I saw Nassim also raised this issue in the comments, that a lot of the time when projects or programs are being designed, all of the important indicators are not necessarily incorporated at that stage. And I think it's important that communities are involved at the program design stage. If that's the case, then what you see is that the challenges at the individual level, at the community level, are then reflected in the program objectives, and then will be hardwired subsequently into the evaluation. But it's also the case that proper evaluation should uncover all aspects and all benefits and all barriers to programs, irrespective of whether or not they're included in the KPIs. And I would point towards our evaluation of the pre-employment supports that we recently undertook for CICAP. Yes, the key KPI was obviously including employability, but through a fundamentally well-designed mixed methods approach, we were able to gather the other benefits of the program in terms of mental health benefits, benefits in terms of the individual's self-confidence, their re-engagement, even at a community and a societal level. So yes, it is important, I think, particularly at the program design stage, that communities are involved and beneficiaries are involved. But I think proper evaluation, if it's properly designed, should be able to fully reflect the wide range of benefits that a program is delivering at a community level.
Okay, thanks for that, Sharon. And you've touched on some of the points. You said Nessun Vaughan brought this up as well. Greg Stratton has a similar question, and it's about capturing the multiplicity of outcomes and objectives and everything like that. So I think you have touched on that. Karen Keaveney has asked a question then. It's similar to about the definition of community development, and it's the precise definition then about rural. Both definition of rural itself and rural development. So again, do you want to give a quick comment on that?
Well, again, these will vary from country to country, but they will have broad consistencies in terms of increasing the well-being and the autonomy and the decision-making capacity, either at the community level generally, or communities within a rural environment. But I will stress again that as evaluators, we start out with the principle of looking at the individual, the objectives and the goals of individual programs that sit below the overarching policy objectives, and that's where evaluation then starts to assess the extent to which programs are actually meeting their goals. Definitions of rural and community development do vary from country to country, but generally speaking, as I said, we start off by looking and we evaluate at a program level. We don't evaluate the entire country level approach to community or rural development. We, as evaluators, evaluate the programs that sit below those overarching themes and assess the extent to which those programs are meeting their objectives or not.
Very good. Again, unfortunately, we don't have more time, but I'm just going to read a contribution from Una Murray. And Una says it would be interesting to have a follow-up session. And this is why I'm reading it out, because I think a lot of issues are coming up today. So a follow-up session is a good idea. So Una specifically talking about a follow-up session on indicators, which are at the core of evaluations. And again, the famous quote, what gets measured gets valued. Important to discuss the challenges in measuring change, who decides the indicators, direct and indicator baselines, developing performance indicators, inputs, outputs, impact indicators, etc. I think Una is fundamentally correct. I think a follow-up session at some stage is going to be warranted, and hopefully we'll be able to do that. I should say, just from a sort of a personal observation, I started working in the Institute over 25 years ago, and at looking back on the evaluations we were doing then, I think they were quite sort of linear, if I can put it like that, in that they tended to be focused on narrow sets objectives and to be highly quantified. And I think over time, and interestingly, people like agencies like Pobble and indeed the department sort of did ask us over time to sort of broaden the scope of the sort of things that we were doing, precisely to capture the much broader set of measures that narrow quantification wasn't achieving. So I think the work within the Institute has certainly developed. It has developed by bringing on board perspectives from outside agencies, and precisely, I think, through these sorts of discussions. So I have to say, I'd be very, very eager that we carry on with this discussion. And again, I think it's great that the department are engaging in these sorts of discussions, and hopefully we'll sort of develop our thinking at a national level in a more precise way about what is the best way of going about these sort of evaluations. So I think it's been a good session, lots of activity on the Q&A function, but hopefully before too long we'll be able to gather and to discuss these issues at greater length. Okay, just also to point out to people, a couple of questions have come in. Will the slides be available? So we'll certainly make the slides available on the ESRI website after the event. And again, I know all the presenters, I think, have made reference to the fact that they'd be happy to engage bilaterally with people. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Kevin McCarthy now, just in a brief second. Kevin's actually going to close the event for us, but before I sign off, I just want to thank everybody for coming along today, for engaging, and specifically then like to thank the department for the engagement with the ESRI on this issue. It's been a fascinating process for us. We're really looking forward to developing the work all the more, and as I said, to having sort of ongoing discussions of the type we've had today. So thanks all around, and with that, I'll hand over to you, Kevin.
Thanks very much, Alan. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I'll be brief, but just to say, first of all, how much I've enjoyed this morning's event. So thanks very much to each of our speakers for their presentations. Adele, Geraldine, Sinead, Adeline. It's been really great to be able to hear those great examples of some of the really positive work that's been undertaken in this space. And I think that the work under discussion this morning is really important, I think, in allowing us to better understand the impact of the work that we're doing as a department, to better inform us in what we're doing, to allow us to better prioritize and target, and to allow us to more effectively tell the story of the impact of our work. So look, as a department, enhancing our research and evaluation capability is something that we're really strongly committed to and have been from the outset, and the research agreement that we have in place with the ESRI is a really important part of that. So look, the report published this morning, as has been mentioned, is the first in a series. I think it provides us with a very solid foundation on which some of the further planned work will now build. The next output will be focused on identifying and analysing key indicators for monitoring rural and community development. And I think, picking up on some of the comments there's some very fruitful discussions to be had over the course of that next phase of work around what those indicators should look like, and what we should be capturing and measuring. And one of the important commitments, as people know, in the programme for government is for the development of broader well-being indicators that can widen our understanding and widen the debate on how well we're doing across key quality of life measures that go beyond the harder economic data that has tended to dominate discourse and dominate our thinking in the past. And for us, a lot of what we're trying to achieve for communities, both rural and urban, is very much grounded in those broader quality of life objectives. As people will have seen, we published a new strategy in recent weeks, Our Rural Future, which sets some very important high-level objectives for improving quality of life and economic opportunity of rural communities over the coming years. And similarly, on the community side, there's a 5-year strategy in place to support the community and voluntary sector in Ireland, sustainable, inclusive and empowered communities, which sets out a course of direction for where we want to be. And in fact, just picking up on the discussion there are agreed definitions of what we mean by community development and what we're trying to achieve when we talk about that within that overall policy framework. It's probably important as well just to say that the last year has probably given us all an opportunity to reflect a little bit on what we value in our own lives and as a society. And again, picking up on the comment there from Una Murray, I think what we measure is very much an important indicator of what we value. And for us as a department, being able to tell that story of what we're doing and how this is impacting is also really important for us in bringing people with us on that journey, in helping communities themselves to see the opportunities and the possibilities that are available to them, and in involving them in that dialogue. It's important to be able to tell that story. So in addition to the research and evaluation program that we're talking about here, you'll see, if you go to our website, a couple of storyboards on our website there relating to specific areas of work, RRDF and SciCap, and how these are impacting. And it's important that we continue to employ various tools, I think, like case studies and distance travel tools, to help us to understand that impact of our work. And the ESRI report being published today is just a really important input in terms of us developing our understanding of what those possibilities are. So look, there's a lot of really valuable work well underway, and I hope that people have got some flavour of some of that this morning. And there's a lot of really important work still lying ahead. And I want to thank Alan and the ESRI for all of their support in this. Thanks very much to the authors of today's report, Adele, Seamus and Alan, to Jean for the work in managing today's event, and to everybody involved in participating in such great numbers here this morning. We're really looking forward as a department to further future opportunities to advance some of this dialogue as we look forward now to the next phase of work under our research partnership with the ESRI. And hopefully we will have a lot more opportunities like this to discuss some of the really important issues that have just been touched upon this morning. But look, thanks very much again to everybody for joining us in such great numbers, and thanks to all of the ESRI team for putting this together this morning.